When I refused to surrender my grandpa's inherited land to my stepbrothers, my mother threw a glass of red wine directly into my face and hissed, "Don't bother coming back until you learn loyalty." The wine was a cheap Merlot. I remember the exact smell of it, sharp, vinegary, mixing with the heavy smoke from the ribs Gerald was grilling in the backyard. The liquid dripped down my forehead, stinging my eyes and rapidly blooming across the chest of the white linen blouse I'd bought specifically for this 4th of July barbecue. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had turned 21 4 days earlier, legally becoming an adult, legally taking full control of the trust my grandfather had left me. Mom stood there breathing heavily, the empty stemless glass still gripped in her hand. We were in the garage, separated from the 60-odd relatives and neighbors drinking beers on the lawn. Gerald, my stepdad, stood 2 feet behind her. He was holding a clipboard, his face flushed a blotchy, uneven red. He had just spent the last 10 minutes explaining to me that his contracting business was drowning in debt, that they couldn't get approved for a commercial loan to save it, and that the only logical solution was for me to sign over the deed to my grandfather's 42 acres of pristine Oregon timberland. They were going to put it up as collateral. "It's the least you can do," Mom had said, her voice entirely devoid of warmth. That was when I started laughing. It wasn't a malicious laugh. It was that hysterical, involuntary sound that escapes your throat when someone's audacity physically shocks your nervous system. That was Grandpa's land. He preserved it for me. He transferred the deed solely into my name before his heart attack, held in an ironclad trust until my 21st birthday. He gave me a tarnished silver pocket watch engraved with, "Time will protect you." That watch and that land were the only things I had in this world that actually belonged to me. Gerald had stepped forward then, his heavy boots scuffing the concrete. "I fed you for a decade. You owe us this equity." Like I wasn't free manual labor. Like I wasn't treated like a stray dog in my own home. I looked him dead in the eye, wiped a drop of sweat from my collarbone, and said, "Absolutely not." That was what triggered the wine. Mom's expression morphed into pure hatred. After she threw it, she didn't apologize. She didn't flinch. She grabbed me by my bare arm, her fingernails digging violently into my skin, and dragged me out of the side door. She shoved me onto the front porch in full view of the guests who had wandered into the front yard. Conversation stopped. People stared at my soaked shirt. "You ungrateful brat," she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "Don't bother coming back until you learn loyalty." I didn't say a word. I turned, walked to my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and drove away. I was shivering despite the July heat. I drove with no destination for about 20 minutes before I realized my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I pulled over in a strip mall parking lot, stared at the faint red stains on my hands, and picked up my phone. I called Aunt Ruth. Ruth was my grandfather's estranged sister. Mom had banned her from our lives nearly 10 years ago, right around the time she married Gerald. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I knew she still lived in the same mid-century house on the edge of town. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her I needed a place to go. When I showed up on her doorstep an hour later, still smelling like cheap wine and humiliation, Ruth took one look at me, stepped aside, and said, "Come in. Tell me everything." I sat at her kitchen island and let 10 years of built-up poison spill out. I told her about how Mom remarried when I was 10, bringing Gerald and his 2 teenage boys, Brandon and Tyler, into our house. I told her how I thought I was getting a real family, and how that illusion shattered in exactly 3 days. I told her about the time I tried to join their driveway basketball game, and 14-year-old Brandon threw the ball so hard into my chest it left a bruise, sneering, "This driveway is for real sons." I told Ruth about how, when I cried to Mom about it, she simply sighed, didn't look up from her magazine, and said, "Don't be so sensitive. You have to earn your place with boys." 10 years of hell followed that day. I became the unpaid groundskeeper. I would be outside at 5:30 a.m., in the bitter frost chopping firewood because Gerald liked a fire in the morning, while Brandon and Tyler slept until noon. I spent my high school weekends scraping popcorn ceilings and painting baseboards in Gerald's cheap flip houses, inhaling dust and paint fumes. Meanwhile, Brandon and Tyler took week-long ski trips to Vail. When I had asked to go just once, Gerald scoffed while eating dinner. "Skiing is a luxury for the core family. We can't afford to take everyone." I was 15. Every Christmas, the boys woke up to keys for used, but perfectly functioning, trucks. My gift was inevitably a generic $50 gift card to a department store, and a typed chore list for the holiday break. But I had kept my head down. I focused entirely on my grades. I secured a full-ride architecture scholarship at the University of Washington. Between that and the knowledge that the Oregon timberland was waiting for me in a trust, I survived. I knew my future was safe. Ruth listened to all of this in absolute silence. She made me a cup of black tea and set it on the counter. She didn't offer pity. She didn't coddle me. "I'm a commercial real estate appraiser, kiddo," she said softly, sitting on the stool across from me. "And I've been watching the county property lines in Deschutes County for a long time." She stood up, walked into her home office, and returned a few minutes later carrying a heavy, fireproof manila envelope. She opened it and spread satellite printouts and county tax documents across the granite island. "Gerald didn't just need your land for collateral today," Ruth said, tapping a highly detailed aerial photograph. "He needed the deed because he's terrified someone is finally going to look at the zoning maps." I leaned in. The 42 acres in Oregon had always been just trees in my mind, a beautiful dense forest of Douglas firs. But on the satellite image, right in the center of the property line, sat a massive clearing. And in that clearing was a sprawling, multi-tiered structure. "For 4 years," Ruth explained, her voice tightening with suppressed anger, "Gerald has been operating a lucrative luxury hunting lodge. He built it entirely across the property line. It is sitting smack in the middle of your 42 acres. I stared at the paperwork. She had printouts from a boutique vacation rental site. The lodge had custom timber framing, a massive wraparound deck, and slept 16 people. They were charging a premium. Mom and Gerald have been pocketing nearly $15,000 a month from wealthy tourists, using a building that legally, fundamentally, sits on land that belongs to you. The air left my lungs. The weekends I spent painting cheap drywall. The mornings I spent chopping their wood. The whole time, they were siphoning wealth off my grandfather's legacy. Gerald had used his contracting crew to clear the land and lay the foundation quietly, assuming because the trust was locked until I was 21, no one would be checking the site. I moved into Ruth's spare room that night. The next morning, she introduced me to Soren Fairfax. Soren was a ruthless, deeply pragmatic property litigator. His office was sterile, entirely devoid of personal touches, which suited me fine. I didn't need a friend, I needed a scalpel. I sat across from his glass desk, wearing a borrowed shirt of Ruth's, and laid out the documents. Soren reviewed the trust, the deed, and the satellite photos in silence for 20 minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were cold and calculating. "This isn't a simple encroachment issue," Soren said, adjusting his cuffs. "If a neighbor accidentally builds a fence 2 feet over your property line, you force them to move it. If a contractor deliberately builds a 4,000 square foot commercial structure permanently permanently on titled land without a lease, the structure legally defaults to the landowner. Meaning? I asked. Meaning, the lodge is yours, Soren said flatly. Every board, every nail, every radiant floor heating coil. More importantly, they have been unjustly enriching themselves using your asset. We are going to file an immediate injunction to freeze their operation. Then we are going to serve them with a lawsuit for 4 years of stolen revenue and illegal trespassing. 3 weeks passed in a blur of affidavits and quiet, meticulous legal filings. I didn't answer a single text from Mom. I ignored the passive-aggressive emails from Brandon telling me to grow up and come apologize to the people who raised you. I sat in Ruth's kitchen, drank black coffee, and reviewed legal drafts with Soren. Then yesterday, Mom called. I don't usually answer, but this time I did. She was sobbing hysterically. The anger from the 4th of July was completely gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless panic. Sweetheart, please, she cried into the receiver. The IRS is auditing Gerald's business. They're looking at everything. We're facing total bankruptcy. They're going to take the house. Please come home. I'll make it right. We need to talk about the Oregon property. We can sell it together, split the profits. I remained perfectly calm. I listened to her hyperventilate. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, I will take it into consideration, and hung up. What I didn't tell her on that call was that Soren had filed the injunction that morning. We weren't just denying them the deed. We were dropping a legal anvil on their entire lives. Mom wanted my inheritance to save her husband's sinking ship. Instead, I was taking the captain's wheel. But this morning, the quiet satisfaction of that phone call evaporated. I was sitting at Ruth's dining table, mapping out my fall semester schedule for when my phone buzzed. It was Soren. I need you in my office, he said. No greeting. Now, I grabbed my keys and made the drive downtown in 20 minutes. When I walked into his conference room, Soren was standing by the window, a thick file open on his desk. He didn't offer me a seat. Gerald's legal counsel just responded to the injunction, Soren said, turning around. His voice was dangerously tight. They are filing a motion to quash it. They aren't backing down. How? I asked, confusion spiking. The land is mine. The deed is clear. You said they have no standing. Soren walked to the desk and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. They didn't build it completely blind. Deschutes County requires a land use consent form to issue commercial building permits. The county wouldn't let Gerald pour concrete without the landowner's signature. I stared at the paper. It was a photocopy of a standard county permit application, dated 3 years ago. I was 18 at the time. At the bottom of the page, on the line marked property owner authorization, was my signature. My stomach dropped. I picked up the paper. The loop of the Y, the slant of the letters, it was identical to how I signed my name. But I had never seen this document in my life. I had never signed it. It's a forgery, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't sign this. I believe you, Soren said bluntly. But it's a damn good one, and it complicates everything. Gerald's lawyer is claiming that you gave explicit, written permission for the lodge to be built on your land in exchange for a verbal agreement of a 5% equity stake in the rental business, which you are now retroactively trying to extort them over. 5%? I felt that same hysterical laugh building in my chest, but I swallowed it down. That's a lie. It's a complete fabrication. Mom forged this. She used to sign my permission slips in high school. She knows exactly how to mimic my handwriting. Soren crossed his arms. Proving forgery takes time. We have to bring in a handwriting expert, request original copies from the county, and depose your mother under oath. It takes this from a swift, lethal property dispute into a protracted fraud investigation. But that's not the immediate problem. I looked up at him, dread pooling in my gut. What's the immediate problem? The immediate problem is Tyler, Soren said. He tapped a second document on the desk. Gerald didn't just build the lodge. He signed a 10-year, ironclad residential lease agreement with your stepbrother. Tyler is currently living in the lodge full-time. He's claiming it as his primary residence and acting as the on-site property manager. I closed my eyes. Tyler, the golden child who got a brand new Ford F-150 for his 17th birthday while I spent the weekend pulling weeds from Gerald's gutters. He was living in my house, on my land. Because there is a tenant claiming primary residency under a lease that Gerald executed using this forged consent form, Soren continued. We can't just lock the doors. We can't freeze the operation immediately. If we shut off the power or change the locks, Tyler can sue you for illegal eviction. So they just get to keep running it? They just get to keep making 15 grand a month while we argue about a forged signature? For now, yes, Soren said. The injunction is stalled until the judge reviews the validity of this signature. Hearing is set for next Thursday. I drove back to Ruth's house in complete silence. The radio was off, the windows were rolled up, the air conditioning was broken, blowing tepid air against my face, but I barely felt it. The scale of the deception was expanding. They hadn't just stolen my land, they had systematically planned this. Mom had sat at our kitchen table 3 years ago, perfectly traced my signature, and handed over my inheritance to her husband. When I walked through the front door, Ruth was waiting in the hallway. She held my phone out to me. The screen was lit up with a missed call notification. Your mother left a voicemail, Ruth said quietly. It transcribed on the screen. I took the phone. The text on the screen was short. You signed the agreement, sweetheart. We have the paperwork. Stop this nonsense before you ruin your own future. Tyler says the lodge needs a new roof before winter. We expect you to contribute. Call me back. I read the words 3 times. We expect you to contribute. They didn't just want the land. They were trying to trap me into paying for the maintenance of a building they stole from me, using a forged document to lock me into a corner. I walked into the kitchen, set the phone gently on the counter, and stared out the window at Ruth's overgrown garden. They thought I would panic. They thought the threat of a legal battle and a forged signature would make me back down, apologize, and fold myself back into the role of the obedient, quiet girl who painted baseboards and took whatever scraps they threw at her. I picked up the phone, bypassed Mom's contact, and dialed Soren's direct line. Fairfax, he answered. How fast can we get an emergency deposition scheduled for Tyler? I asked. Soren paused. I could hear the faint click of a pen on his end. If I push hard, maybe Tuesday. Why? Because Tyler is an idiot, I said, my voice steady, stripped of any emotion. He's 22 years old, and he's never worked a real day in his life. If Gerald set him up as the property manager, Tyler won't know the first thing about the actual finances or the permitting. He's just living there for free. If we get him under oath before Gerald has time to coach him on the fake equity agreement, Tyler will contradict their entire defense. It's a risk, Soren warned. If Tyler sticks to the script, it solidifies their claim of an existing business arrangement. He won't, I said. Subpoena him. Soren hung up without another word. I stood in Ruth's kitchen for a long time, the phone still pressed against my ear until the screen went black. Outside, the afternoon sun was hitting the gravel driveway, making the heat rise in wavy lines off the stones. Tuesday was 4 days away. 4 days for Gerald to realize his bluff hadn't worked, and 4 days for my mother to try every emotional manipulation tactic she had spent the last decade perfecting. The first move didn't take 4 days. It took less than 24 hours. On Saturday morning, around 9 o'clock, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine woke me up. I pulled back the curtains in Ruth's spare room and saw Brandon's black Ford F-150 idling right outside the front porch. He didn't get out. He just sat there in the cab, the engine vibrating through the floorboards of the house, letting the exhaust bloom against Ruth's manicured hydrangeas. It was a classic Gerald tactic executed by his oldest son. Intimidation without touching anyone. Ruth walked into my room holding a mug of coffee. She didn't look scared. She looked exhausted. He's been out there for 10 minutes, she said, her voice flat. Do you want me to call the county sheriff? No, I said, pulling on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. That's exactly what they want. They want to look like the victims of an overreaction. I went downstairs and opened the front door. The morning air was crisp, but the smell of diesel ruined it. I walked down the porch steps and stopped about 5 feet from Brandon's driver's side window. He rolled it down slowly, leaning his elbow on the frame. He was wearing his Oakley sunglasses, the kind he always wore when he wanted to look important while supervising me clearing brush. Mom's sick, Brandon said. No hello, no preamble. She's been throwing up since yesterday. Her blood pressure is dangerous. The doctor had to come out to the house. Then she should be in bed. Not sending you here, I said. Brandon sneered, the same look he gave me when I was 15, and asking for a turn on the lawnmower. You think you're so smart because you went off to college on a free ride. You think you're better than us. Dad built a business from nothing while you sat in your room drawing pictures of buildings. And now you're trying to destroy it over some dirt you didn't even earn. Grandpa earned it, I said, my voice completely steady. And he left it to me. Not to Gerald. Not to you. That lodge is Dad's. Brandon barked, his face flushing beneath his tan. He paid for the lumber. He paid the crews. If you think some fancy lawyer in a suit is going to just hand you a 3-story building for free, you're out of your mind. Mom told me to tell you this is your last chance. Drop the injunction, sign the partial easement so we can get the loan, and we'll forget you tried to screw us. If you don't, Dad's going to make sure you don't get a dime from that property anyway. Is that a threat, Brandon? It's a fact, he said, slamming the truck into reverse. Enjoy living in an old woman's spare room. He stomped on the gas, spraying gravel across Ruth's lawn and tearing down the road. I stood there until the dust settled. My hands weren't shaking this time. For 10 years, that kind of talk would have sent me directly to my room, wondering what I had done wrong, trying to figure out how to make myself smaller so they wouldn't notice me. But looking at Brandon now, all I saw was fear. They were terrified because the walls were closing in, and they didn't have any real leverage left except the noise of a truck engine. When I went back inside, Ruth was sitting at the table with a stack of old ledger books. He's wrong about one thing, she said, looking up. Gerald didn't build that business from nothing. He built it on the backs of local subcontractors he consistently underpaid, and he used your mother's credit to secure his first 3 commercial lines. I've been calling some old contacts in the county planning office this morning. She turned one of the ledgers toward me. It contained a list of names and dates. Gerald didn't just build that lodge 4 years ago, Ruth explained. He started clearing the timber lines 6 years ago, when you were 15. He logged nearly 4 acres of your grandfather's old growth pine before he even laid the foundation for the lodge. He sold that timber to a mill over in Bend under a shell company called Ridgeview Assets. He stole the timber to pay for the foundation of the building he put on my land? I asked, the sheer scale of the operation making my head spin. Exactly, and I found the man who did the hauling. A guy named Leaf Thorne. He used to work for Gerald until Gerald stiffed him on a 3-week grading contract. Leaf still lives down by the river. He hates Gerald's guts, and he's kept every single haul ticket from that summer. By Monday, Soren had added Leaf Thorne's formal affidavit to our filing. The noose was tightening, but the real test was Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, Tyler's deposition. The conference room at Soren's firm smelled like expensive leather and old paper. Soren sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a court reporter to his left setting up a small stenography machine. I sat next to Soren, holding a cold glass of water. At exactly 9:58 a.m., Gerald's attorney, Vance Aldrich, walked in. He was a sharp-featured man with graying hair and a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. Behind him came Tyler. Tyler looked miserable. He was 22, but without his truck or his friends around him, he looked like a teenager who had been caught shoplifting. His navy blue suit was tight across the shoulders, and he kept adjusting his tie like it was choking him. He didn't look at me once. He sat down across from Soren and immediately began chewing on the inside of his cheek. This deposition is now on the record, Soren said, his voice rhythmic and calm. He went through the standard legal warnings, explaining the penalties of perjury. Tyler nodded quickly, his eyes darting toward Aldrich for reassurance. Soren started with the basics. Tyler's education, his employment history, his official role at the hunting lodge. I'm the managing partner, Tyler said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat. I handle the day-to-day operations, the bookings, the maintenance, the client relations. And how much are you paid for this role, Tyler? Soren asked. $5,000 a month plus expenses, Tyler said, squaring his shoulders a bit. And where does that money come from? The business account. Ridgeview Assets. Soren leaned forward, sliding a copy of the vacation rental registry across the table. According to these public records, the lodge has been booked for an average of 22 nights a month for the last 3 years, at a rate of $700 a night. That's roughly $15,000 a month in gross revenue. Where does the remaining $10,000 go? Tyler looked at Aldrich. Aldrich didn't move. It goes back into the business, Tyler muttered, for capital improvements. Capital improvements like what? Soren asked. You know, upkeep, fixes. We had to put in a new gravel road 2 years ago. We had to fix the septic system. Soren turned a page in his folder. And who authorized those improvements, Tyler? My dad did. Gerald, but you just testified that you are the managing partner, Soren noted, his pencil hovering over his pad. Does Gerald have an ownership stake in Ridgeview Assets? He's the founder, Tyler said, looking confused. So Gerald controls the finances of a business operating entirely on land owned by my client, using a forged land use consent form? Aldrich tapped his pen on the table. Objection. Counsel is assuming facts not in evidence regarding the consent form. The signature has not been ruled a forgery by the court. Let's talk about that signature, Soren said, ignoring Aldrich completely. He pulled out the photocopy of the county permit application with my alleged signature at the bottom. He slid it over to Tyler. Tyler, take a look at Exhibit C. Were you present when this document was signed? Tyler stared at the paper. A small bead of sweat had formed near his hairline. No. Do you know when it was signed? Sometime 3 years ago, I guess, when we got the permits. Did you ever discuss this document with your stepsister? Soren asked, pointing at me. Tyler glanced at me for a fraction of a second, then looked down at his hands. My dad said it was all handled. He said she signed it so we could build the place. That wasn't my question, Soren said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. Did you, Tyler, ever have a single conversation with the plaintiff regarding this land, this lodge, or this signature prior to last month? No, Tyler whispered. Speak up for the record, please. No, I didn't. So you had no personal knowledge of any agreement between my client and your father? My dad said I don't care what your father said, Soren interrupted said sharply. I am asking what you knew. Did you ever see my client sign this piece of paper? No, Soren nodded, making a slow note on his legal pad. The room was dead silent, except for the click-clack of the reporter's machine. I watched Tyler's left leg jiggling under the table, his shoe tapping against the carpet in a frantic, irregular rhythm. He was breaking, just like I told Soren he would. He didn't know the details. He was just the kid they put at the front desk to collect a paycheck and keep the property occupied. Aldrich cleared his throat, pulling a heavy blue folder from his briefcase. If you're done establishing that my client wasn't in the room 3 years ago, I'd like to introduce Exhibit D. He slid the folder across the table to Soren. I leaned over to look. Inside was a formal legal claim, stamped by the Deschutes County Clerk's office at 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. It was a notice of mechanics lien. My clients are filing a counterclaim for unjust enrichment, Aldrich said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. Even if the court finds that the land use consent form contains an invalid signature, which we do not concede, the fact remains that over the last 4 years, Gerald's contracting firm has invested $340,000 in materials, labor, and infrastructure development on that 42-acre plot. If the plaintiff intends to claim ownership of the structure under real property law, she must first satisfy the outstanding construction costs. We have attached every invoice, lumber receipt, and subcontractor bill to that filing. I felt the blood drain from my face. $340,000. Furthermore, Aldrich continued, turning to look directly at me with a cold, professional smile. Until that lien is satisfied or bonded out, my client Tyler remains a lawful tenant under an executed 10-year lease agreement. Any attempt to interfere with his occupancy or the operation of the lodge will result in an immediate suit for commercial tortious interference and unlawful eviction. We are prepared to tie this land up in litigation until your client completes her degree and long after. Soren didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just closed the folder, his fingers resting lightly on the blue cover. A mechanic's lien requires a valid contract with the property owner or an authorized agent. Mr. Aldrich, if the signature is fraudulent, there is no contract, and therefore no basis for a lien. The improvements were made with the apparent consent of the household, Aldrich countered. Your client lived under the same roof as the contractor, while these invoices were being generated. She benefited from the household income derived from his business. You can't separate the two now just because she turned 21 and had a disagreement with her mother. We'll see what the judge thinks about apparent consent when fraud is involved, Soren said, standing up. This deposition is concluded. The ride down the elevator was silent. I waited until we were out on the sidewalk, the midday traffic of downtown Seattle buzzing around us, before I turned to Soren. Can they do that? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Can they force me to pay for a building I never asked them to build? Soren stopped by his car, pulling his keys from his pocket. He looked at me, his expression serious. In real estate law, a mechanic's lien is a nuclear option. It clouds the title. It means you can't sell the land, you can't borrow against it, and if a judge decides that Gerald acted in good faith, meaning he genuinely believed he had permission, even if the paperwork was flawed, you could be on the hook for the value of those improvements. But he didn't act in good faith, I said, anger rising hot in my chest. He forged my name. We have to prove he knew it was a forgery or that he executed it himself, Soren said. Right now, it's a stalemate. They've complicated the timeline. If the judge doesn't throw the lien out on Thursday, we're looking at a trial that could take 2 years and cost $50,000 in legal fees alone. I don't have $50,000, I said. My scholarship covered tuition and housing, nothing more. My entire net worth was a 20-year-old Honda and a silver pocket watch. I know, Soren said softly. Go back to Ruth's. Let me look over these construction invoices. Gerald's a contractor, which means he's sloppy with his books when he thinks no one's looking. There's always a crack. We just have to find it. When I got back to the house, Ruth was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask how it went. She could tell by the way I shut my car door. I walked past her into the kitchen, threw my purse on the counter, and pulled out the tarnished silver pocket watch from my pocket. I set it down next to the tea kettle. Time will protect you. Right now, time felt like it was running out. They filed a lien, I told her, staring at the engraving on the back of the watch. $340,000. If I want the land, I have to buy the building they stole from me. Ruth didn't say anything for a long time. She walked over, picked up the watch, and rubbed her thumb over the tarnished silver. Your grandfather bought this watch in 1974, she said quietly. He bought it the day he cleared his first 10 acres of that Oregon land. He told me that land wasn't just dirt, it was a buffer against the world. He said as long as you have something that can't be moved, no one can ever truly corner you. She set the watch back down. Gerald thinks he's a big fish because he knows how to manipulate county paperwork, she continued, her eyes hardening. But he's small time. He's drowning in debt because he overextended his flip houses during the interest rate hikes last year. He needs that $340,000 because his suppliers in town have already cut off his credit. If he doesn't get this loan using your land as collateral by the end of the month, his entire company goes into receivership. What does that mean for us? It means he can't afford a 2-year legal battle any more than you can, Ruth said. He's bluffing with that lien. He expects you to panic and settle. He expects you to offer him a deal just to make the lien go away. I'm not giving him a single inch, I said. The phone on the counter rang. The caller ID showed Mom's number. I picked it up on the second ring. I didn't say hello. Sweetheart? Mom's voice was completely different now. The screaming from the porch, the whine in my face, it was like it had never happened. She sounded small, fragile, like a victim. Are you there? Please don't hang up. I'm here, Mom. Tyler called us from the lawyer's office, she sobbed. He was crying. Honey, he's just a boy. Why are you doing this to your brother? He hasn't done anything to you. He's just trying to build a life out there. He's living on my land, using money from a business built on forgery, I said, my voice dead of any warmth. He's not my brother. He made that clear 10 years ago when he watched Brandon throw a basketball into my chest and laughed. That was a childhood game. She cried. Why do you hold on to everything? Why are you so full of malice? Gerald is a good man. He provided for you. He put a roof over your head for 10 years. I paid for that roof with my hands, Mom, every weekend, every summer morning while your real sons were asleep. You know exactly what happened in that house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, the fragile act dropped. Her voice became cold, sharp, and narrow. You think you're so independent now because of that scholarship, but you're still just a kid who doesn't know how the world works. If Gerald's business goes under, I go under too. My name is on those loans. Do you want to see your mother on the street? Is that what your grandfather would have wanted? Grandpa would have wanted you to respect his wishes, I said. He left that land to me for a reason. He knew what Gerald was the second he met him. If you don't drop this by Thursday, she hissed, Gerald is going to file for full reimbursement of every single dollar we spent raising you. Every meal, every pair of shoes, every medical bill from when you had your appendix out at 12. We have the receipts, you ungrateful little bitch. We will strip you bare. Good luck explaining that to a judge, I said, and hung up. My heart was pounding pounding against my ribs, but for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt a strange, cold clarity. They were completely out of options. They were threatening to sue me for childhood medical bills because their actual legal defense was built on sand. An hour later, Soren emailed me. The subject line was just 2 words. Look here. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF of the construction invoices Gerald had submitted for the mechanics lien. Soren had run the business license numbers for the subcontractors Gerald listed as having done the framing and foundation work on the lodge 3 years ago. 2 of the primary subcontractors didn't exist. One company, High Desert Framing, had its business license dissolved 5 years ago, 2 years before the lodge construction even started. The other, Cascade Concrete, was registered to an address that turned out to be a vacant lot behind a car wash in Redmond. Gerald hadn't paid outside crews $340,000. He had used his own internal employees from his flip house business, paid them their standard hourly wage, and then created fake invoices under defunct company names to inflate the value of the lien by over $200,000. It wasn't just civil fraud anymore. It was criminal construction fraud. I've already forwarded this to the Deschutes County District Attorney's office, Soren wrote in the body of the email, and I've sent a copy to Vance Aldrich with a 24-hour deadline to withdraw the lien and the lease agreement voluntarily. Let's see how loyal Gerald's lawyer is when his own license is on the line. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The silver pocket watch on the counter seemed to catch the light from the window. Time will protect you. We were 48 hours away from the Thursday morning hearing. I knew Mom and Gerald wouldn't just sit by while their entire empire crumbled. They were cornered, and cornered animals always bite. But as I looked out at the quiet Oregon skyline in the distance, I realized something. They thought they were fighting for a business. I was fighting for the only piece of my grandfather I had left, and I wasn't going to stop until every single one of them was off his land. The 24-hour deadline Soren had given Vance Aldrich expired at noon on Wednesday. I spent the morning sitting on Ruth's porch, watching the clock on my phone tick down, drinking lukewarm tea. At 12:15 p.m., my phone rang. Aldrich is out, Soren said. He sounded like he was smiling, though with Soren it was always hard to tell. He just filed a motion to withdraw as counsel for Gerald and Tyler, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. He also formally withdrew the mechanics lien. Just like that? I asked, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a month. Lawyers like Aldrich care about their retainers, but they care about their bar licenses more, Soren explained. Submitting known forged documents to a court is a career ender. He wasn't going to go down with Gerald's sinking ship. So what happens tomorrow at the hearing? Tomorrow, Gerald has to stand in front of a county judge without a lawyer and explain why he shouldn't be immediately enjoined from operating a business on your land, Soren said. Get some sleep, wear a suit. Thursday morning, the Deschutes County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, wearing a navy blazer I'd borrowed from Ruth. She sat next to me, reading a paperback novel as if we were waiting for a bus. At 8:45 a.m., the elevator doors opened at the end of the hall. Mom walked out first. She was wearing a conservative beige dress, her hair pulled back into a tight, neat bun. She looked pale, clutching a tissue in one hand. Gerald was right behind her. He looked awful. The confident, sneering contractor who had told me skiing was for the core family was gone. His suit looked too big for him. His face was drawn, and he was sweating heavily. Tyler trailed behind them, looking like he was marching to his own execution. Mom locked eyes with me. She didn't look angry today. She looked devastated. She took a step toward me, opening her mouth to speak, but Ruth snapped her paperback shut with a sharp crack that echoed in the empty hallway. Don't even think about it, Ruth said without raising her voice. Mom stopped. Her jaw tightened, and she turned away, leading Gerald and Tyler to a bench on the opposite side of the hall. We didn't speak until the bailiff opened the doors. Judge Stellan Keating was a tired-looking man in his early 60s who seemed annoyed by everything. He flipped through the case file for 3 solid minutes in complete silence while we stood at the plaintiff's table, and Gerald stood alone at the defense table. Tyler and Mom sat in the gallery right behind him. Mr. Fairfax, Judge Keating finally said, looking over his reading glasses. Your motion for an emergency injunction to halt operations at Ridgeview Lodge. Yes, Your Honor, Soren said. The defense's counsel withdrew yesterday, taking their primary counterclaim with them. The defendant is currently operating a commercial enterprise on titled land belonging to my client, using forged county permits. Keating looked at Gerald. Mr. Calloway, you are appearing pro se today? Gerald gripped the edges of the defense table. His knuckles were white. Your Honor, my lawyer quit on me yesterday without warning. I am asking the court for a 30-day continuance to find new legal representation. It is fundamentally unfair to force me to argue this today. Your Honor, Soren interrupted smoothly. While a continuance for a full trial may be appropriate, the injunction cannot wait. Every day this lodge operates, the defendant is unjustly enriching himself and exposing my client to massive liability. Furthermore, Tyler Calloway is currently occupying the premises under a lease we have proven is fraudulent. Gerald leaned forward, his voice cracking. I built that place. I put my blood and sweat into it. She's just a kid trying to steal my business because she has a grudge. Mr. Calloway, lower your voice, Keating snapped. He looked back at the file, tapping a pen against his chin. The silence stretched out, agonizing and heavy. I am going to grant a 2-week continuance for the defense to secure new counsel, Keating said. My stomach dropped. 2 more weeks. However, Keating continued, his voice hardening. Given the withdrawal of your previous counsel in direct correlation to allegations of forged construction invoices, I am granting the plaintiff's emergency injunction in full, effective immediately. Gerald stumbled back a half step, like he'd been physically hit. Ridgeview Lodge is ordered closed, Keating said, signing a paper on his desk. Tyler Calloway has 72 hours to vacate the premises. All business accounts associated with the property are frozen pending a full audit. We are adjourned. The gavel hit the sound block. It was a dull, wooden thud, but to me it sounded like an explosion. I turned to look at the gallery. Mom was sitting completely still, staring blankly at the back of Gerald's head. Tyler had his face buried in his hands. We won the injunction. The lodge was shut down. But as we walked out of the courthouse into the bright morning sun, Soren didn't look celebratory. He was already typing on his phone. We need to get out there, Soren said, looking up. Today, the judge gave Tyler 72 hours. I said. I don't care, Soren replied, walking briskly toward his car. Gerald knows it's over. He knows he's never getting that building back. Do you know what a desperate contractor does to a property he's being forced to surrender? I froze, the realization hitting me like cold water. He strips it. Exactly, Soren said. Appliances, copper wiring, custom timber, HVAC units. He'll try to rip out everything of value and claim it was part of his inventory. We are driving up there right now. Ruth insisted on coming. We took her Subaru because it could handle the logging roads better than my Civic. The drive out to the property took 45 minutes. For the first 20, the paved highway driveway wound through familiar stretches of pine and scrub oak. Then we turned off onto the county dirt road that bordered my grandfather's acreage. My chest tightened as we crossed the property line. I hadn't been out here since I was a child. The last time I stood on this dirt, my grandfather was still alive, pointing out the different types of bark. Now, a massive, professionally graded gravel driveway cut through the trees. We rounded the final bend, and the lodge came into view. It was enormous. A sprawling, 3-story structure made of dark stained timber and river stone. It looked like a luxury ski resort plopped in the middle of a private forest, and parked right in front of the sweeping wrap-around porch were 2 heavy-duty flatbed trucks. Brandon was standing in the bed of one of the trucks, securing a massive stainless steel commercial refrigerator with ratchet straps. Tyler was dragging a heavy leather sofa out the front door. "Hey!" I yelled, throwing the car door open before Ruth had even fully parked. Brandon paused, looking down at me from the truck bed. He didn't look intimidated. He looked furious. "Get off this property," he shouted back. "The judge gave you 72 hours to pack your clothes, Tyler," Soren said, stepping out of the car, holding a folder with the court order. "Not to strip the fixtures. Put the refrigerator back." Gerald walked out of the lodge. He was carrying a crowbar. He had changed out of his court suit and was wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt. He stopped at the top of the porch stairs, staring down at us. "This is my equipment," Gerald said, his voice low and dangerous. "I bought it. I have the receipts, which are currently frozen under a court order, along with the rest of Ridgeview assets," Soren countered smoothly. "If you remove fixed appliances or structural elements from this building, I will have the sheriff here in 20 minutes to arrest you for grand theft in violation of a court order." "It's a couch," Tyler whined, dropping his end of the leather sofa onto the dirt. "I sleep on this couch." "Take your personal belongings," I said, stepping past Soren. I walked right up to the base of the wooden stairs, looking up at Gerald. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at him as my stepfather, or as the man who controlled the thermostat, or the man who handed out chores. I was looking at a trespasser. "Take your clothes, Tyler," I said evenly. "Take your TV. Take whatever small things you bought with your own money. But if you unscrew one more hinge, if you take one appliance, if you damage a single floorboard in this house, I am going to bury you." Gerald tightened his grip on the crowbar. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to walk down the stairs and swing it. His eyes were completely dark, stripped of any pretense of civilization. We were miles from the main road. It was just us, the trees, and a man who was watching his entire financial life evaporate. "You little parasite," Gerald spat. "You think you won? I have $500,000 in debt tied to this place. The bank is going to foreclose on my primary residence by the end of the month. Your mother is going to lose her home because of you." "No," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline shaking my knees. "She's going to lose her home because she married a thief." "Put the crowbar down, Gerald." He didn't move. "I appraise commercial real estate in very remote, very hostile parts of this county, Gerald," Ruth said loudly. She had stepped out of her car, her posture completely rigid, her hands dug deep into her jacket pockets. "And I don't like repeating myself. The lawyer told you to put the appliances back. I suggest you listen to him before I call the Deschutes County Sheriff's dispatcher, who I happen to play bridge with on Tuesdays." Brandon froze in the truck bed. Tyler took 3 rapid steps backward away from the couch. Gerald stared at Ruth. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Slowly, agonizingly, Gerald lowered the crowbar. He tossed it onto the wooden deck, where it clattered loudly. "Unstrap the fridge, Brandon," Gerald muttered, turning his back on us and walking back into the lodge. We stayed there for 4 hours. We watched them unstrap the refrigerator, carry the leather couch back inside, and slowly, bitterly pack trash bags full of Tyler's clothes. Nobody spoke. The silence was punctuated only by the slamming of truck doors and the crunch of gravel under heavy boots. By 4 p.m., the flatbeds were loaded with nothing but cardboard boxes, clothes, and a few pieces of cheap bedroom furniture. Brandon got into his truck and drove off without looking at us. Tyler followed a few minutes later in his F-150. Gerald was the last to leave. He walked out the front door, locked it, and walked down the stairs. He stopped when he reached me. He held out a single silver key on a plain ring. I didn't reach for it. I just looked at him. He dropped it into the dirt at my feet. "I hope this place rots," he said, getting into his heavy work truck and starting the engine. I waited until the sound of his engine faded completely into the distance. The forest was suddenly overwhelmingly quiet, just the wind and the high pines and the distant call of a jay. I bent down, picked up the key, and wiped the dirt off it with my thumb. I walked up the wooden stairs. My hand was shaking as I put the key in the lock and turned it. The heavy timber door swung open. I stepped inside. The interior was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the valley. A massive stone fireplace dominated the living room. Radiant floor heating warmed the soles of my shoes. It was beautiful, luxurious, and entirely built on a foundation of lies and stolen timber. "Well," Ruth said, walking in behind me, looking around the vaulted ceiling. "It needs a deep clean, but the craftsmanship isn't terrible." Soren walked in, assessing the layout with a critical eye. "We need to get a property management company up here by Monday to secure the perimeter and change all the locks. He gave you 1 key, but you can bet he has 10 copies." "I'll handle it," I said, walking over to the massive windows. I touched the cool glass. This was mine. It felt surreal, but the victory felt hollow. I had the land. I had the building. But my mother hadn't called. She hadn't texted. She was sitting in a house in town that was about to be foreclosed on, entirely blaming me for the destruction of her life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an unknown number, a local Bend area code. I answered it. "Hello? Is this the owner of Ridgeview Lodge?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded stressed, professional, and slightly panicked. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who is this?" "My name is Maren Cahill. I'm an event coordinator with Summit Weddings," she said. "I've been trying to reach Gerald or Tyler for 3 days. We have a 50-person wedding party scheduled to check in tomorrow afternoon for a full weekend buyout. They paid a $25,000 deposit 6 months ago. Gerald's phone is disconnected, and the gate code he gave us isn't working. Are we still clear for load-in tomorrow at 8 a.m.? I stared out the window at the empty dirt driveway. The business accounts were frozen. Gerald was gone, and a wedding party was showing up in 16 hours, expecting a fully staffed luxury lodge. "Tomorrow?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Yes," Maren said, her voice ticking up an octave. "Please tell me the lodge is ready. We have caterers arriving at dawn." I gripped the phone tight enough to crack the case. I looked at Ruth, who was inspecting a water stain on the ceiling, and then at Soren, who was already typing on his phone again. "Maren, give me exactly 2 minutes," I said. "Don't hang up." I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the mute button. I looked at Soren. "There's a 50-person wedding party arriving tomorrow, a weekend buyout. They paid a $25,000 deposit to Gerald 6 months ago." Soren stopped typing. He slowly lowered his phone. "Cancel it." "I can't just cancel a wedding 16 hours before load-in," I said. "Legally, you have to," Soren said, his voice taking on that sterile courtroom edge. "Ridgeview Assets is frozen. You do not own Ridgeview Assets. You own the land and, by default, the structure. But you do do not have a business license, you do not have liability insurance for a commercial event, and you do not have the remaining funds from that contract. If a guest trips on the stairs tomorrow, they sue you personally. If we lock the gates and turn away a 50-person wedding," Ruth interjected, stepping away from the window. "The bride sues Gerald. Gerald is bankrupt, so her lawyers look for the next deep pocket, which is the physical property. Us. Plus, the lodge gets blasted all over the internet as a scam, destroying any future revenue before she even gets the locks changed." Soren pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's a legal minefield. It's a 50-person wedding," Ruth corrected. "It's a logistical nightmare. There's a difference." "Put her on speaker." I unmuted the phone and put it on the kitchen island. "Marin, I'm here. This is the new owner. There has been an immediate change in management as of this morning." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "A change in management? 16 hours before the rehearsal dinner? Where is Gerald?" "Gerald is no longer affiliated with this property," I said, trying to mimic Soren's flat, authoritative tone. "The lodge is open. We will be here for load-in at 8. Okay, Marin breathed, sounding like she was on the verge of a panic attack. "That's fine, but I have a massive problem. The caterer, Cora Fenn, just called me. She tried to deposit Gerald's final payment check yesterday, and it bounced. She says if she doesn't have $8,000 in hand by tomorrow morning, she isn't unloading the truck. And the cleaning crew Tyler usually hires canceled. They said they haven't been paid in 2 months." I looked at Ruth. Ruth was already rolling up the sleeves of her cardigan. "Tell her the caterer will get a cashier's check at 8 a.m., Ruth said loudly toward the phone. "And tell her the lodge will be spotless." "Who is that?" Marin asked. "That's my operations manager," I said. "See you at 8, Marin," I ended the call. The silence in the massive timber room rushed back in, heavier than before. Soren stared at me. "You don't have $8,000. "I have liquid assets," Ruth said, pulling a ring of keys from her pocket. "I'll go to the credit union in town before they close. Consider it a loan against the property. But we have a bigger problem than the caterer." She pointed down the hallway toward what looked like the main utility closet. A thin stream of water was pooling out from under the door, soaking into the hardwood floor. I ran over and yanked the door open. The main water line for the lodge fed into an enormous industrial filtration system. Gerald hadn't just taken Tyler's clothes. He had taken a wrench to the primary pressure valve. He didn't steal it. He just backed the threads off enough that water was aggressively spraying against the drywall, flooding the closet and threatening to warp the floors. "He wants it to rot," I whispered, remembering the look on his face when he threw the key in the dirt. Soren pushed past me, grabbed the main shutoff lever, and pulled it down hard. The spraying stopped, leaving a heavy, dripping silence. "Well," Soren said, looking at his soaked Italian leather shoes, "the water is off, which means your 50 guests currently have no functioning toilets and no showers. Call Holt," Ruth told me, tossing me her car keys. "Holt Devereaux. His number is on the fridge at my house, under the magnet shaped like a trout. He's the best plumber in Deschutes County, and he owes me a favor because I appraised his ex-wife's house low during the divorce." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to the bank. Then I'm going to the hardware store to buy 3 mops, bleach, and a dozen boxes of trash bags. Tyler lived here like a frat boy, and we have 16 hours to turn it into a 5-star resort." Ruth left. Soren stood in the hallway, dripping water onto the floor. "I am a litigator," he said flatly. "I bill $400 an hour. I do not scrub toilets." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "I need you to draft a temporary operating agreement, something that protects me from liability this weekend while we sort out the LLC." Soren sighed, a long, exhausted sound. "Fine, but I'm doing it from my car. The Wi-Fi in here is probably stolen." I spent the next hour doing a full walkthrough of the property. It was worse than I thought. Tyler hadn't just lived here. He had neglected it. There were empty beer bottles stuffed behind the custom leather sofas. The industrial kitchen smelled like grease and old garbage. The linens in the 6 guest rooms were stripped, wadded up in damp piles in the laundry room. Gerald had built a beautiful shell, but they were running it into the ground. They were treating my grandfather's legacy like a cheap motel. By the time Ruth returned, the sun was starting to set over the pines, casting long, dark shadows across the deck. She walked in carrying 2 massive buckets, a stack of industrial cleaning supplies, and a manila envelope. "Cashier's check," she said, tossing the envelope onto the kitchen island. $8,000. "Payable to Cora Fenn." "I'll pay you back," I said. "Every cent, with interest." "You'll pay me back by not letting Gerald win," she said, tossing me a bottle of bleach spray and a rag. "Start on the bathrooms, all 6 of them." At 7 p.m., Holt Devereaux pulled his work van up to the lodge. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and a permanent scowl. He didn't knock, he just walked in carrying a massive red toolbox. Ruth said Gerald Calloway finally got what was coming to him. Holt announced to the empty room. I walked out of the hallway, wearing rubber gloves and smelling strongly of ammonia. "He did. I'm his stepdaughter." Holt looked me up and down. "You look like you actually work for a living. That's an improvement. Where's the leak?" I showed him the utility closet. He took one look at the valve and scoffed. "Amateur hour." He stripped the threads on purpose. "I have to replace the whole housing unit. It's going to take me 3 hours and I'm charging you double my emergency rate because I was supposed to be watching the Mariners game." "Put it on my tab, Holt," Ruth called from the kitchen, where she was aggressively scrubbing the stainless steel range. For the next 10 hours, we didn't stop moving. I scrubbed floors until my knees bruised. I ran 6 loads of laundry, folding heavy white duvet covers and wrestling them onto king-sized mattresses. I cleaned pine needles off the deck with a push broom by the light of the exterior floodlights. Ruth polished the massive windows, swept the soot out of the fireplaces, and organized the kitchen. Holt finished the plumbing at midnight, turned the water back on, checked the pressure, and left without saying goodbye. By 5:30 a.m., I was sitting on the floor of the kitchen, leaning against the cold refrigerator door, eating a stale granola bar I'd found in Ruth's glove compartment. Every muscle in my body ached. My hands were raw from the bleach. I had slept for exactly 20 minutes on the floor of the laundry room. Ruth walked in, her hair completely unkempt, holding 2 mugs of black coffee. She handed one to me and leaned against the counter. We looked around. The lodge was immaculate. The hardwood floors gleamed. The windows were streak-free. The heavy timber beams looked rich and warm in the early morning light. "Your grandfather would be proud," Ruth said quietly. Before I could answer, the crunch of gravel echoed from the driveway outside. It was 6:00 a.m. I stood up, my joints popping, and walked to the front window. A large white box truck was backing up to the delivery entrance. The side of the truck read Fenn Catering and Events. A woman stepped out of the driver's side. She was short, muscular, and had her hair tied back in a severe practical knot. She marched up the front steps holding a clipboard like a weapon. I opened the front door before she could knock. "I'm looking for Gerald," Cora Fenn barked, "or Tyler, whoever is actually signing the checks today, because if I don't see paper in the next 2 minutes, I'm putting this truck in drive." "Gerald is gone," I said, stepping out onto the porch. The morning air was freezing, but I didn't care. "I'm the new owner." Cora stopped, eyeing my bleach-stained clothes and exhausted face. "You look like you're 20. I'm 21, I said. I reached into my back pocket, pulled pulled out the manila envelope, and handed it to her. Cashier's check, $8,000. The final payment for the weekend. Cora opened the envelope, inspected the check, and traced her thumb over the bank watermark. She looked back up at me, her expression softening just a fraction. Gerald bounced 3 checks on me this year, Cora said, her voice lowering. He told me it was a bank error. Then he stopped answering my calls. I almost lost my business because of him. He won't bounce another one, I said. The kitchen is clean. The fridges are empty and running. You can load in. By 8 a.m., the lodge was completely transformed. Cora's team had unloaded crates of fresh produce, racks of glasses, and towers of white plates. The kitchen was humming with activity. Marin Cahill, the event coordinator, arrived in a flurry of clipboards and anxiety, but relaxed visibly when she saw the state of the property. It looks better than it did when I toured it with Tyler in January, Marin admitted, standing in the great room. I don't know what happened between you and Gerald, but frankly, I don't care. You saved my life today. Just make sure the bride is happy, I said. I went upstairs to the master suite to change out of my cleaning clothes. Ruth had brought a duffel bag from her house with some of my things. I put on a pair of clean black slacks and a white button-down. I tied my hair back. I splashed cold water on my face in the master bathroom, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I had dark circles under my eyes, but I didn't look like the girl who used to paint Gerald's baseboards. I looked like a landowner. I walked back downstairs just as the first wave of guests started arriving. A convoy of luxury SUVs pulled up the gravel driveway. Well-dressed people stepped out, admiring the timber frame, pointing at the view of the valley. Marin was at the door, greeting them with champagne flutes. I stood near the back of the great room, out of the way, watching the operation run. It was actually happening. We had pulled it off. Then the front door opened, and the groom walked in. He was laughing, flanked by 3 groomsmen carrying garment bags. He was tall, wearing a designer half-zip sweater, and had the kind of easy, effortless confidence that came from a lifetime of wealth. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stranger. I knew him. It was Caspian Novak. 3 years ago, when I was 18 and scrubbing the popcorn ceilings in one of Gerald's flip houses in Bend, Caspian was the kid who lived next door. His family owned half the commercial real estate in the county. We had spent that entire summer talking across the property line. He was the first person who ever told me I should be an architect. He was the first person I ever told about my grandfather's land. We had kissed exactly once, in the bed of his truck, before he went back to Stanford and stopped returning my texts. He hadn't seen me yet. He was talking to Marin, pointing toward the sweeping staircase. I took a step backward, intending to slip into the kitchen, to hide in the pantry until the weekend was over. I didn't want him to see me like this, the hired help, the ghost from a summer he had clearly forgotten, the girl standing in a lodge she barely held the rights to. But as I stepped back, my shoulder bumped into a tray of champagne glasses sitting on a high-top table. The glass didn't break, but it clattered loudly against the metal tray. Caspian turned around at the noise. His eyes swept across the room and landed on me. He stopped mid-sentence. His smile faded, replaced by a look of absolute stunned confusion. Before he could say anything, a woman walked through the front door behind him. She was stunning, tall, blonde, wearing a tailored cream coat, holding a small dog in one arm and a designer weekender bag in the other. She hooked her free arm through Caspian's and looked around the great room. "It's gorgeous, babe," she said, her voice echoing perfectly off the timber walls. Then she looked directly at me. "Excuse me," she said, raising a hand and snapping her fingers twice. "Can you take our bags upstairs to the bridal suite?" I stood perfectly still. Caspian was staring at me. The bride was holding out her bag, and somewhere in my pocket, the heavy tarnished silver of my grandfather's pocket watch seemed to burn against my leg. I didn't reach for the bag. I looked at the Louis Vuitton leather, then up at the blonde woman holding it, and finally over at Caspian. The great room was bustling with Cora's catering staff carrying silver trays, but right in our little triangle, time seemed to freeze. "Well," the bride said, her tone sharp, snapping her fingers one more time. "I don't want to stand here all day. The bridal suite is on the 3rd floor, right? I don't handle luggage," I said. My voice was perfectly flat. The bride blinked, lowering her arm slightly. A crease formed between her perfectly manicured eyebrows. "Excuse me? Are you not the staff?" Before I could answer, Marin, the event coordinator, came rushing over, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. She stepped between us, holding her clipboard like a shield. "Sloan, Caspian, I am so sorry," Marin said breathlessly, gesturing toward me. "There was a slight miscommunication this morning. This isn't the staff. This is the new owner of Ridgeview Lodge." Sloan stopped frowning and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "The owner? Where's Gerald? He's the one who took our deposit." "Gerald is no longer operating this venue," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Sloan. "I assumed management this morning. Marin will be handling all your logistical needs for the weekend. If you need your bags carried, there are brass luggage carts by the front door. Or you can ask one of your groomsmen." Sloan's mouth tightened. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Certainly not by someone wearing bleach-stained sneakers and a borrowed shirt. She turned to Caspian, clearly expecting him to intervene, to pull rank, to say something about how much money they were spending. But Caspian wasn't looking at her. He was staring at me, his face pale. "You own Ridgeview?" Caspian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do," I said. "Since when?" "Since the land was deeded to me," I replied. I didn't elaborate. I didn't owe Caspian Novak an explanation of my family trauma, and I certainly wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing how close Gerald had come to stealing it all. Sloan looked back and forth between us. Her eyes narrowed. "Do you two know each other?" "We were neighbors one summer," I said quickly, before Caspian could speak. "In Bend. 3 years ago." "Right," Caspian said, finally breaking his stare and looking down at the floorboards. "Yeah, 3 years ago." "Fascinating," Sloan said, though her tone suggested it was anything but. She picked up her bag, hoisting it onto her shoulder. "Well, neighbor, I hope your change in management doesn't affect the schedule. We have a rehearsal dinner at 7 and the pyrotechnics crew needs to be set up by 9. Marin, come with me. I want to see the suite." Sloan marched toward the heavy timber staircase, Marin trailing anxiously behind her. Caspian lingered for a second. The groomsmen had already wandered off toward the patio, laughing about something. It was just the two of us standing by the entrance. "I didn't know," Caspian said softly, "about this place. When you told me about your grandpa's land that summer, you never said there was a massive lodge on it. There wasn't supposed to be," I said. "Excuse me, I have to check on the kitchen." I walked away before he could ask another question. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. It was a deep, humiliating kind of anger. Caspian Novak. The boy who sat on the hood of his truck and listened to me talk about my dreams of becoming an architect. The boy who made me feel like I wasn't just the quiet girl who scraped paint for a living, was marrying a woman who snapped her fingers at people. I pushed through the swinging doors into the commercial kitchen. Cora was shouting orders at 2 prep cooks who were furiously chopping vegetables. The smell of roasting garlic and rosemary was overwhelming. I grabbed a towel, ran it under the cold sink, and pressed it against the back of my neck. "You good?" Cora asked, not looking up from a massive pan of searing chicken breasts. "Fine," I said, "just tired." "Don't be tired yet," Cora warned. "We have 48 hours $5 until these people leave. Wealthy weddings are a meat grinder. They will ask for the moon, and if you don't give it to them, they'll complain about the stars. Stay out of the bride's way. I fully intended to. But an hour later, Marin pushed through the kitchen doors, looking like she was about to cry. I need you, Marin said, grabbing my arm. Now, it's the contract. I followed her out into the hallway away from the noise of the kitchen. She opened her leather binder and pointed a shaking finger at a line item on the second page of the venue agreement Gerald had signed 6 months ago. Custom pyrotechnics display, 30 minutes, $5,000 paid, in full. Sloan just asked me to confirm the launch site for the fireworks tonight after the rehearsal dinner, Marin whispered frantically. I called the pyrotechnics company Gerald listed on the vendor sheet. The number is disconnected. I checked the county registry. There is no permit filed for a fireworks display at this address. I closed my eyes. Gerald took the $5,000 and never booked them. Worse, Marin said. Deschutes County issued a level 3 burn ban 3 days ago because of the dry winds. Even if we had a company on standby, it is highly illegal to launch fireworks right now. If we light so much as a sparkler, the fire marshal will fine the property owner $10,000 and shut the event down. Then there are no fireworks. I said simply. Go tell her. Marin stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. I can't tell Sloan Novak she isn't getting her fireworks. She will end my career. Her father-in-law is Richard Novak. He practically owns the Bend City Council. I don't care if her father-in-law is the governor, I said. I am not burning down 42 acres of old-growth timber, and I'm not taking a $10,000 fine for Gerald's fraud. If you won't tell her, I will. I walked away from Marin, heading straight for the great room. Sloan was sitting on one of the leather sofas, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by 3 bridesmaids. Caspian was standing by the massive stone fireplace, checking his phone. I walked right up to the sofa. Sloan, I said. She looked up, annoyed by the interruption. Yes, there will be no fireworks display tonight, or at any point this weekend, I said, keeping my voice loud enough for Caspian to hear. There is a strict county burn ban in effect. Furthermore, the vendor Gerald contracted for the display does not exist. He embezzled your $5,000 pyrotechnics fee. You will have to pursue him for that refund. The bridesmaids went dead silent. Sloan slowly lowered her champagne flute. Are you joking? Sloan asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. I paid for fireworks. It is in my contract. Your contract was with Ridgeview Assets, an LLC that is currently frozen under a court order, I said. I am allowing this wedding to proceed because Marin and Cora are good people and I didn't want to ruin your weekend. But I am not violating a level 3 burn ban. Sloan stood up. She was 2 inches taller than me in her heels. Do you have any idea how much money we are spending here? We are the only reason this place is open right now. Actually, you're the reason I've been scrubbing toilets since midnight to fix the mess the previous management left, I replied, the filter on my mouth completely vanishing. There are no fireworks. Do not light anything on this property, or I will call the sheriff myself. Sloan, wait, Caspian said, stepping forward. He put a hand on his fiance's arm, but she shook it off. He looked at me, his expression caught somewhere between pity and embarrassment. Look, we can fix this. My dad knows the fire marshal. He can make a call, get us a variance for tonight, and I can pay the fine. Just let us bring a crew in. I stared at him. It was the same Caspian, the same easy reliance on his father's money, the same belief that the rules didn't apply if you could write a big enough check. I don't take bribes to burn down my grandfather's trees, Caspian, I said. The answer is no. I turned my back on them and walked out of the great room before Sloan could start screaming. My heart was hammering in my throat. I had just declared war on a family that could bury me in bad press, but I didn't care. It was my land. I stepped out onto the front porch to get some air. The afternoon sun was warm, but the wind cutting through the pines was sharp and dry. The burn ban was no joke. The forest was practically a tinderbox. Ruth's Subaru pulled up the gravel driveway. She parked near the catering truck, killed the engine, and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before getting out. She wasn't carrying cleaning supplies this time. She was holding her phone, and she looked grim. She walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of me. You need to sit down, Ruth said. I don't have time to sit down, I said, rubbing my temples. Sloan is probably calling her lawyers to sue me for lack of explosives. Forget the bride, Ruth said, her voice dropping. I just got off the phone with Soren. Gerald didn't go home this morning to lick his wounds. A cold spike of dread hit my stomach. What did he do? He went to the bank, realized his commercial accounts were officially locked, and then he made a phone call, Ruth said, to the University of Washington, specifically the financial aid office. I stopped breathing. What? Gerald filed a formal grievance reporting a change in your financial status, Ruth explained, her words precise and heavy. Your architecture scholarship is need-based, right? It requires you to maintain a low-income threshold. Yes, I whispered. It covers full tuition and housing. Without it, I can't afford a single semester. Gerald submitted the county tax records to the university, Ruth said, holding up her phone. He showed them that you are the sole titled owner of 42 acres of commercial real estate and a luxury lodge valued at roughly $3 million. He told them you've been hiding assets to defraud the scholarship committee. I grabbed the porch railing to steady myself. The wood felt rough and splintered under my palms. But I don't have that money, I said, panic rising in my throat, fast and suffocating. The accounts are frozen. I don't have a dime of that revenue. I just have the dirt and the building. I can't liquidate it because of the trust structure, and I can't run the business until the LLC is resolved. The financial aid office doesn't look at nuance, kiddo, Ruth said softly. They look at on paper net worth. Soren said the university sent an automated notice to your student email 20 minutes ago. Your scholarship has been suspended pending an immediate review. Suspended. The word sounded foreign. 10 years of surviving Gerald's house, 10 years of keeping my head down, doing my homework by the light of a desk lamp while the boys partied, all to secure my escape route. And Gerald had just burned the bridge while I was standing on it. If I lose that scholarship, I lose my degree, I said, my voice trembling. I have 2 years left. I have $80 in my checking account. Soren is drafting a response to the university, Ruth said, putting a hand on my shoulder. He's going to explain the injunction and the frozen assets. He's going to fight it. Soren is a property litigator, I snapped, the anger suddenly overriding the panic. He bills $400 an hour. I can't pay him to fight my university. I can't pay him for any of this. I turned away from Ruth, looking out at the massive driveway filled with luxury cars for a wedding I didn't want, at a lodge I never asked for, sitting on land that was supposed to protect me. Time will protect you. My grandfather's watch felt heavy in my pocket. He had been wrong. Time wasn't protecting me. Time was just giving Gerald more opportunities to dismantle my life. The heavy front door of the lodge swung open. Marin stepped out onto the porch, looking between me and Ruth. Her clipboard was pressed tightly against her chest. I'm sorry to interrupt, Marin said, her voice tight with stress, but Sloane's father just arrived. He's demanding to speak with whoever is in charge about the fireworks. And Marin hesitated, biting her lip. He brought a county fire marshal with him. I walked past Marin and pushed open the heavy front door. Standing at the base of the porch steps was a man who looked like an older, sharper version of Sloan. He was wearing wearing a navy blazer and an expression of absolute entitlement. Next to him stood a man in a tan Deschutes County uniform. His name tag read Fenn. He looked incredibly tired. "Are you the new management?" Sloane's father demanded, not waiting for me to speak. "My name is Whitmore Drent. I understand there's some confusion about the pyrotechnics display I paid for." "There is no confusion, Mr. Drent," I said, walking down the steps to meet him on the gravel. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't shrink. "There are no fireworks." Whitmore Drent's face darkened. He turned to the fire marshal. "Fenn, tell her what we discussed." Marshal Fenn sighed, shifting his weight. "Mr. Drent requested a variance for the burn ban. I told him that the only way the county even considers a variance during a level 3 ban is if the property owner signs a direct liability waiver accepting full financial responsibility for any fire damage and puts a county engine on standby for $3,000 an hour." Fenn looked at me. I also told him I wouldn't recommend it. "I'll pay the standby fee," Whitmore said, pulling a checkbook from his breast pocket. "You just sign the waiver. My daughter wants her display." I looked at the checkbook, then up at Whitmore. "Mr. Drent, you can write a check for $1 million, and it won't matter. There are no fireworks to light." Whitmore stopped. "What are you talking about? Gerald Calloway didn't just step down this morning," I said, my voice carrying cleanly in the dry air. "He was legally evicted by a county judge. Your contract was with his LLC. When I took possession of the property today, I audited the vendor list. Gerald took your $5,000 pyrotechnics deposit and pocketed it. He never hired a crew. He never filed for a permit. He embezzled your money." Whitmore stared at me. The annoyance on his face fractured, shifting rapidly into something much colder. Men like Whitmore Drent didn't care about burn bans or environmental risks, but they cared deeply about being robbed. "Embezzled," Whitmore repeated, the word sounding like gravel in his throat. "Yes," I said. "His commercial accounts are currently frozen, pending a criminal investigation into construction fraud. If you want your $5,000 back, you will have to join the line of creditors suing him. But tonight, there will be no fireworks on my land. You can explain that to Sloane, or I will." The front door opened again. Caspian stepped out onto the porch, looking between me and Whitmore. "Arthur," Caspian said cautiously to his future father-in-law, "what's going on?" Whitmore didn't look at him. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb already jabbing at the screen. "That contractor Calloway, the one your father recommended. He stole my deposit." He held the phone to his ear. "Get me my legal team on the line." Now, Whitmore turned his back and walked toward the line of parked SUVs, barking orders into his phone. Marshal Fenn looked at me, gave a slow, approving nod, and tipped his hat before walking back to his county truck. Caspian stood on the porch, looking down at me. The easy, golden boy charm he used to carry so effortlessly was completely gone. He looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," Caspian said quietly, "about Sloane and Whitmore. I didn't know Gerald stole from them." "I didn't know Gerald stole from you." "You don't have to apologize for them, Caspian," I said, "but you do have to go inside and get married. The caterer is setting up the rehearsal dinner in an hour." I walked back up the stairs, brushing past him without waiting for a response. I didn't look back. 3 years ago, I would have cared what he thought of me. Now, all I cared about was keeping my property intact. The rest of the weekend was a blur of exhausting, relentless manual labor. Ruth and I didn't sleep. We ran the lodge like a military operation. When the bartenders ran out of ice at 11 p.m., I drove my Civic into town and bought 20 bags from a gas station. When a guest clogged the toilet in the bridal suite on Saturday morning, I fixed it before Sloane even knew it happened. I washed dishes for Cora in the commercial kitchen. I swept the deck at dawn. We didn't give the Novaks or the Drents a single reason to complain. The wedding was flawless. Marin told me it was the smoothest event she had run all year. By Sunday afternoon, the guests were packing their cars. Sloane walked out the front door, perfectly put together, not a hair out of place. She didn't look at me as she got into Caspian's Range Rover. Caspian paused with his hand on the door, gave me a tight, unreadable smile, and got in. They drove away, taking the noise and the entitlement with them. I locked the front door behind them and sank onto the leather couch in the great room. My boots were covered in dust, my hands were cracked, but the lodge was empty, and it was mine. On Monday morning, my phone rang. It was Soren. "Check your student email," Soren said. "No hello." I opened my laptop on the kitchen island. There was a message from the UU Financial Aid Office. My scholarship had been fully reinstated. "How?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Funny thing about wealthy people," Soren said, sounding deeply satisfied. "They have very aggressive lawyers. Whitmore Drent didn't just let the $5,000 go. He filed a formal police report for wire fraud against Gerald on Friday afternoon. He also called the district attorney directly. So, I took that police report, combined it with the DAW's preliminary investigation into Gerald's fake construction invoices, and sent the whole package to the university," Soren explained. "I showed them that the tipster who reported your wealth is currently facing multiple felony charges for fraud, and that the property in question is entirely frozen in receivership because of that fraud. You have no access to the capital." The university legal department took one look at it and threw Gerald's grievance in the trash. I let out a breath that rattled in my chest. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. The degree was safe. My future was safe. "What happens to Gerald now?" I asked. "The mechanic's lien is dead," Soren said. "The fake invoices crossed the line into criminal forgery. The DAW is moving for an indictment by the end of the month. Between the construction fraud, the wire fraud with the wedding deposit, and the ears audit, Gerald is looking at real prison time. His creditors are already circling his primary residence. The house will be foreclosed on in a matter of weeks." Soren paused, the silence stretching over the line. "You won," he said finally. "The deed is clear. The structure is legally yours. Once the LLC audit is done, you can sell the lodge for a few million. Or you can hire a management company to run it while you finish school. But it's over. They can't touch you anymore." I thanked him and hung up. I walked out onto the massive wraparound deck. The Oregon sun was high, baking the scent of pine needles into the air. Ruth was sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs, drinking tea and reading the local paper. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mom. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she threatened to sue me for my childhood medical bills. I looked at the screen. I didn't want to answer it, but I knew I needed to hear it. I needed to finish it. I hit accept and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello? They took his trucks," Mom said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollow, stripped completely bare. "The bank sent tow trucks this morning. They took the F-150s. They put a notice on the front door. We have 30 days to vacate the house." I didn't say anything. I just watched a hawk circling over the timberline. Tyler moved out, she continued, a faint sob catching in her throat. "He went to stay with a friend. Brandon won't return my calls. Gerald is just sitting in the kitchen. He won't speak to me. His lawyer told him he has to take a plea deal or he'll get 10 years. "I know," I said. "Please," Mom whispered, the word breaking in half. "Please, sweetheart, you have the lodge. You have the land. You could sell it. You could give us enough to pay off the commercial debts, just enough to keep the house. You have millions of dollars sitting out there. You don't need all of it." I leaned against the wooden railing. I thought about the frosty mornings when I was 12, chopping firewood while her husband watched from the window. I thought about the the red wine stinging my eyes in the garage. I thought about the sheer, calculated cruelty of trying to take my scholarship just to watch me burn with them. You told me not to come back until I learned loyalty, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I was angry, she cried. I didn't mean it. We're family. Real family sticks together. Grandpa was my real family, I said. And he left me this land to protect me from people exactly like you. Don't do this. Please. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Mom, I said. But you're not coming here. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hung up. I went into the settings, blocked her number, and put the phone back in my pocket. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the tarnished silver watch. The metal was warm from my body heat. I ran my thumb over the engraving on the back. Time will protect you. I walked over to the Adirondack chairs and sat down next to Ruth. She lowered her newspaper and looked at me. She didn't ask who called. She already knew. So, Ruth said, taking a slow sip of her tea, you're a junior in college who happens to own a fully furnished luxury hunting lodge. What are you going to do with it? I looked out over the 42 acres of Douglas firs. The wind moved through the branches, a low, steady rushing sound that had been here long before Gerald Calloway, and would be here long after him. I'm going to hire Marin as the full-time operations manager, I said. I'll let Cora handle the exclusive catering contracts. I'll take a percentage of the gross to pay for my master's degree, and I'll keep the rest in trust. Ruth smiled. It was a small, sharp thing. Good plan. It needs a new name, though. Ridgeview Assets is dead. I know, I said. I opened the face of the pocket watch, listening to the quiet, steady ticking of the gears inside. I think we'll just call it the Buffer.